This is a loosely coupled show with James Hickey and Derek Comartin. We talk about software architecture and design. Make sure to subscribe to get all our latest episodes.
Coming back to microservices, we've mentioned this before, like if you have individual services that need to ask another service for something, or if that's very common in your architecture where one service is like querying directly to another one, hey, I need this information. That's a sign that your boundaries are probably wrong. We've talked about, there's issues with that. So it's kind of like, any solution to fixing that is more a Band-Aid than anything, I would say, right? If your boundaries are wrong. Now, I would probably caveat and say, like, cross-cutting things, like authentication, for example, logging, maybe, like, I would let that pass. And again, it depends, like.
Yeah, I guess a better way of putting that, I guess what you're saying, which I'm on board with, is there's exceptions to the rule and everything, but you're primarily not having synchronous request response everywhere, and that's not the primary way you communicate. That would be I think the way I would kind of say how I think where you're going.
Yeah, it's more like your actual like application logic is now needing to do response request to other over the network, essentially, to other microservices. Now, I shouldn't say over the network, period, because you're going to have a database. You're going to have to go over the network. Or if you have a cache, then you have to go over the network. But specifically, between microservices, if you're having to do a lot of request response, then that's a sign that your boundaries are wrong. So I would leave out like auth and logging and those kinds of things. Because if you're using some kind of like built-in library to handle that stuff, I mean, they're probably going to be making requests to those like backend third-party services or whatever. But for your application, so I feel like anything other than let's restructure how we've modeled the data in this, where we're storing our data, or how the behaviors are functioning. Anything after, anything other than that is, for me, it's kind of like a Band-Aid. And again, it depends. Like, your company may not have the resources to do that. Like, you might have already kind of gone so far that that's a huge effort to change, because you're going to break a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I suspect it is. And I think we kind of touched on this before with the whole Uber thing, which is, I think it's just the natural outcome of having a monolith that you're trying to rip apart, and you had all these, in process communications that now you're just saying, hey, we're going to tear this code base apart and we're going to make this an RPC call, because we need to separate this stuff, and we need to, because of the size of the code base, the size of not the teams, sheer number of developers working on it that are now getting broken down into teams. I could see how it's like that's the natural evolution, especially if it comes from a monolith and getting broken apart. But so I get it. I get that systems are gonna have request response everywhere, and that you're gonna be depending on other services. I think, like you said, the Band-Aid part of it, I'm kind of with you. I feel like, but I don't think some people have a choice necessarily. So when we were talking about, consistency, availability, partition tolerance is, I think, if everything were great and you could build everything from scratch all the time, you wouldn't be thinking about. I wouldn't be thinking about consistency. I think the reason why people think about consistency again, I'm generalizing here, in some systems is because they will be caching data locally from other systems, from other services, right? So you get some events over the wire from some message queue saying this happened, and then you end up caching that data locally so that you don't have to go then query the other system. But I go back to half the time is your boundary wrong there though? Like what do you need that data related to, like you're getting an event that something happened in another system, and then you need to go query to find out what exactly it was because that event doesn't tell you enough, basically.
Yeah. And like you said, if you're caching information from another system or process, whatever you want to call it, service, like that is a query, right? You're still requesting that information, but like you said, you're just caching it.
Yeah.
But that's still a sign that you're still needing that information outside of your system. So it's like you don't have everything you need. And yeah, guys, on the note of consistency, it's like if you're in a situation where you have to think to yourself, like, I need to do this operation atomically, but I can't because there's whatever the reason is, which will probably be like, I need to store this across multiple things, like I need to do this in a distributed way. Then it's like, that could be a sign too that the issue of inconsistency is actually related to your boundaries also.
Yeah.
It may be that because you're trying to store what should be an atomic operation, you're storing like pieces of what should be one data model, across multiple systems. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I guess, just they're all signs of kind of that main issue, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just when you think about CAP, I think it makes sense. I think it's a thing that you would need that I don't know if whether people are really thinking about it necessarily that much. I think people generally err on the side of availability, hence why people will cache local data, but they're not necessarily thinking about like the trade-offs. But again, I keep going back to, like, you don't have to think about partitions if you have autonomy.
Yeah.
Right. It's like we were saying earlier. It's like you're trying to fix a problem that you don't necessarily need to have. However, having said that, sometimes you're in the situation where that's just the situation.
Yeah.
Like it's like, okay, if everything was unicorns and you wouldn't be in, then you'd be able to, hey, let's redefine all these, but that's just not the reality of systems. So if you are in the situation where you are in this and you have to choose between consistency, availability, you're going to figure it out what matters. But
yeah, and I think that whole CAP theorem was very popular for like low level stuff, right? So people building databases, things like that, like people, it would apply there. But now we're talking about like line of business applications where 20 years ago, really, did like most developers building line of business applications really?
No, you would have thought about this.
You need to know that?
You would have been thinking of it in the sense of the app and the database running on the same server.
Yeah.
That's what you would have thought of. Like, oh, well, if the database, like we have this, these two nodes essentially, the database server and the actual application, and they're running on the same server. So if the power goes out, well, that's the only way you're breaking the partition. Like,
yeah,
it's local. So it's like there's nothing to think about. It's like somebody unplugged the server. Like, it's funny. It's actually when Twitter was down, like, I don't know, the last week, whenever it was, I posted like, somebody needs to reboot the server. Like, I guess that's as easy as what it is now, right?
Yeah. Just click the button in your
Yeah, just somebody go into the server room and
dashboard.
yeah.
Oh, you don't even have a server room anymore. Just click a button somewhere to
Yeah.
restart your app service or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, I was just going to say, like, one example of that would be like kind of the classic orders kind of thing where if like you're placing an order and then like the piece of code that needs to ship stuff needs to, like, it's time, okay, everything's paid and it's time to now like ship the product. Where are you getting that shipping address from?
This is a good
Do you
example.
have it already?
Yeah.
If you don't have it already, that's probably a sign that your boundaries are wrong.
And
If you have to go to like a customer service or whatever, right?
exactly. That's exactly the example I used semi-recently in a video, which was a dead money which was, okay, you have like place order, and the place order command was sending the shipping address, the order detail. It was like all in wonder. And then once it actually had to go to shipping had to synchronously get that information from kind of the order checkout part of it. And it's like, no.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like when you're completing the order, that like when you're going through the checkout process and you're setting shipping information, you're giving that to the context that needs it. So to me, that one is a really good example of, yes, it's because boundaries are wrong. So like you don't need to be thinking about, oh, what's my trade-off here between consistency and availability? It's like neither. You're going down the wrong path. Like it's neither of those. But again,
it's like you said with the mud. You're trekking through the mud, and you're putting on boots and making this contraption. It's like, just don't go through the mud.
Just stop walking in the mud. However, like again, I said it a couple times now. The reality of life and systems is that it's not just that easy to change, or if you're already down this path, and because everything was one big thing at one point and you're trying to separate it, it's not going to be like, I think the first step is, okay, let's just turn these in-process calls to something just remote, like over the network. We're just going to do RPC now, and that's just how it goes. But,
yeah, and that easily leads down the path of, why are we making so many requests to this other service? Our performance is bogging down. So like, okay, now what, we gotta load balance this thing, I guess, or cache. And it's like, again, those are kind of like Band-Aids, right? And now those introduce things like staleness. Now it's like you've got stale data that you have to deal with, which may or may not be a problem. I mean, most applications I've seen, like, there's a small core of your application that probably really needs to be really need to consider those things, but most other things realistically don't really need to worry that much about any of that stuff. And I mean, that's a whole other thing we could talk about too, is like all this stuff we're talking about too. It's like 20% of your application, this probably really matters. And then the other 80%, it's not that complex. It's mostly CRUD based. And I mean, that's not true for some systems.
I go with 80-20 Pareto principle for everything in life.
Okay.
So I'm going to agree. Yeah, probably 20%.
At least that is my experience. It's like, if you're, I don't know, like one system I'm working on is like booking. Yeah, it's like the main thing is like you're an employee and you're booking time off. It's like, yeah, that whole piece should probably really make sure it works well. And but like kind of all the other stuff of like creating a user and creating like the kind of time off that you can book, whether it's a vacation or appointment, like how often do you do those things? Not that often.
It's just like setup data.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess, I mean, you alluded to it with like the caching and stuff, and I guess that's where we can jump off to the next episode. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Loosely Coupled Show. If you did, please subscribe for more on software architecture and design.